So Mom grew up in St. Helens, Oregon.
Joanne was the oldest of four, and she and her sister Verla had a great time together. They spent a lot of nights having sleepovers with their cousins Afton and Elma Sue, and Elma Sue says that they giggled all night long.
Nice little cute modest house, but it had it always smelled like roses. I would distinctly remember that because my grandma, I guess she always had roses around. I don't know if she had like some kind of, like back then I don't even think they had air freshener, so I have no idea how she did that. Maybe it was like rose petals, potpourri, I have no idea. It always smelled like roses.
She loved being a sister, and the memories that she has of Verla and Debbie, and then of Brent, who died relatively young in his teens, but she had just very fond memories of growing up in Oregon.
Her dad worked a lot, and he worked in the sawmill. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom.
So my grandma and grandpa, Rhea and Everett, had the most beautiful relationship I've ever seen of a couple. They were just so kind to each other, and my grandpa Everett was just a gentleman. Rhea didn't ever drive, and so he would drive Rhea to the store that she needed to go shopping at and sit in the car and wait for her to shop.
When he fell in love with her, he just treated her like a princess, and I imagine he treated his daughters like princesses too.
What I remember about her parents is that they were very loving, and you could tell that they were in love. There's certain couples that you can kind of tell that the light has died, you know, but you could tell that he doted over her.
I mean, her love of singing carried through, into her adulthood. And I mean, I would go with her and my dad to choir practice on Sundays, and I just know she loved to sing. Sometimes she sang soprano, sometimes she sang alto, but I learned how to sing from going to the church choir with my mom and dad. No, I'm just an excellent singer because now
I know that she loved singing, and that was one of her favorite things to do, to sing in that women's quartet. And they sang for wedding receptions and sacrament meetings and all kinds of stuff.
So as I remember it, Elder Swallow was in town, and he was invited to dinner at the Powell residence.
So my mother met her husband, Roland, when he was serving his mission, and she was a teenager. She had 3 close friends, and when she saw him, she was excited that new missionaries were coming to their ward. And when she saw he and his companion, she said, well, at least they could have sent some good-looking ones.
So Joanne and her sisters were, younger than them, but close enough that there could be a little bit of attraction. I think I remember her saying something about how afterwards, maybe perhaps her and Verla chatted a little bit about the missionaries that were over, and that they were attractive, or one of them was. I don't know if she pinpointed Roland or not.
I think he then went to a different area, and they wrote to each other, and then he finished his mission and he went into the Army Reserves, and they kept in touch. And then when he said, when you get to BYU,
did he say, Joanne, please come? I don't know. But I know that she went to BYU to basically find him, I think.
He just showed up at her door one day, and their first kiss was over the sundial at BYU.
I guess she was probably drawn to Roland because of his blue eyes, and he was a hard-working farm boy. Who knows, maybe her parents said, Joanne, you should go for him. I don't know. But he was probably funny, he was probably a little bit funny, and so, hardworking and funny. What more could you ask for?
Roland proposed to Joanne on the hill behind the Mazer building at BYU. And I remember them showing that to me as where Dad proposed to Joanne.
She thought that he was very handsome. I know that. And I think he made her laugh.
I think that Joanne came from a pretty funny family. I think from Everett, kind of a dry humor. And both of her sisters, Debbie and Verla, funny gals, have a great sense of humor. And so I think that was the attraction to Roland, because Roland has a pretty good sense of humor, kind of dry too. And so I think they must have jived that way. I think she must have caught his sense of humor, and that she kind of related to that.
I remember them, growing up, just a lot of laughter, and my dad was always joking around.
I think she thought he was handsome.
Roland was always a pretty fit guy. There's some photographs of him actually with his shirt off, and impressive, doing a handstand and such.
We're clearly in love when they first met, and I think my dad adored my mom.
They just seemed to really get along very well together. As they got older and with all the kids and things, there was a lot more stresses in their lives.
Growing up, they were very practical, I think, in their communication, because they just had so many kids. They had to divvy up the responsibilities. I think they just talked things out a lot, and I think Mom was probably more, unless she had a strong feeling about something, I think she let Dad kind of take the reins on anything important, and her focus was more on the children.
Joanne was overworked with children, and she didn't have high energy like Roland did. So she wasn't like the farm wife that maybe Roland thought he was getting, where just stuff was always in order and getting done. And so he would come home from work, and I think he had sort of an expectation that things would be maybe more in order. And so rather than bring that to Joanne's attention, at least in front of us, he would just go do the thing. He would just go wash the dishes or clean up something, or he would just go outside and attend to those duties, so that he didn't have to think about how the children weren't doing their homework and the dishes weren't done and that sort of thing. Yeah, I always thought that some of his actions were kind of passive aggressive, like, I'm doing this because it's not done, rather than asking directly for someone to do it. He would ask the kids to do things directly, but I don't remember him ever asking Joanne to do something.
It was very equal in that she was the purse strings. Like, she was the one that paid all the bills and was in control of the money.
And I remember there being tension. I remember there being kind of, them not seeing eye to eye on what it was important to spend money on. I remember she found a super good deal on a table with 10 chairs that the family was in need of, and she bought it without asking, and Roland was very upset, and it was a tension-filled day.
Probably most of the struggles were just keeping us fed, and financially, Dad working in the summer, extra jobs, and that might help pay for a new teenage driver's car or things like that.
Well, I know that I don't think that's the best setup for success, to have a bunch of kids and then have such a low salary. I think that's going to just create tension. But, they managed it really well, I would say, considering.
Dad was always and Mom, they were both very thrifty, very cautious about what they spent money on, to the point that they would even wait until several errands had to be run in the same area of town before they would run those errands, just so they could save gas. Well, Mom was always trying to find the absolute best possible deals that she could.
My childhood was, pretty happy, chill. Not, there wasn't drama in the house. There wasn't, Dad would get on my mom about spending money. That was about it. The only arguments I ever heard in the house were about money, and it was because my mom would put stuff on credit cards, and my dad did not want credit cards, but we were really poor. So, just to get basic stuff like clothes and stuff, she felt like she needed to, sometimes needed to do that. So whenever I heard any arguments, it was about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember him cutting up credit cards, the ZCMI credit card and the Mervyn's credit card. Well, my dad was a school teacher, and there just wasn't enough money to buy basic necessities. And so sometimes my mom would charge things on the Mervyn's card or the ZCMI card, and my dad would find out, and he would be mad because he hated debt. And he knew that there was no way to catch up to that debt, that he wasn't making any extra money. Well, he had a few extra side jobs now and again. He would sell World Book encyclopedias for some summers. He did that.
Mom was like a single mom in the summers because Dad would go out to help Grandpa Swallow with the ranch and doing hay and such, and Mom was home, and Devin and Ryan would go out with him as well. So she had 6 of us at one point at home alone.
I mean, it was kind of a family effort to make ends meet. And I mean, it was like, this is what we're gonna do. Not, do you wanna help? It was like, this is what we're gonna do. Tonight we're canning. It's the weekend or it's summer, you're gonna go outside and you're gonna pit apricots all day and put them on drying sheets.
We would go fruit picking. Dad would find out where we could go pick fruit for free. A lot of times that involved him getting up into a tree and shaking the tree and crying out like Tarzan, which we loved. And he would throw down some sort of tarp material and shake the tree, and we'd all pick it up. And then of course we would go home, and Mom would can gallons and gallons and gallons of peaches, cherries. Yeah, we spent a lot of our summer days prepping fruit and doing that, or drying it.
I think I was in maybe 8th or 9th grade, and I wanted a pair of Nike Flights. And so I was kind of showing them to my mom, and I was really excited about it. I never had a nice pair of shoes before. I think I had one pair of Nikes prior to that that were more like the $20 or $30 pair, like the generic pair. And so these pair of Flights I was really eyeing. I was pretty stoked on them. And I don't think I asked for them, but she saw the intent was there. And so she bought them for me. I think they were $70. And then this would have been in like 1990 maybe. So there was less kids at home. There was a little more money, but still $70. I think Roland would have lost his shit. So she asked me not to tell my dad that how much they were, or that she had purchased them. That was the sense I had, is that she would probably want to be a little more liberal with money.
I have fond memories of my father waking up early so that he can pour cracked wheat or whole wheat in a bowl for each of us, or oats, and pour boiling water on it and let it sit there, so that by the time we got up to go to school, we had a nice hot bowl of mush to eat before we went to school. Freshly ground. I mean, what more could you ask for?
So we never got free lunches at school, even though we qualified for free lunches. My dad always paid for them because he didn't believe that it was right to have his neighbors pay for his children's lunches.
I mean, we qualified for food stamps, we qualified for lots of things, and he didn't believe in it. He believed in finding creative ways, and he would work every summer and work part-time jobs during the year. And and this is what's so funny to me too, is that like when we wanted to get jobs as teenagers, it wasn't really encouraged, which I think if I had 8 kids, I would have them all working. I mean, it wasn't encouraged. They wanted us to, keep our grades up, and they really believed in education and wanted to make sure that we were focused on that and not working.
Even though we didn't have a lot, he was very giving to other people who he thought had less.
You need some pants or some shoes, go down to the storage room and get the boxes out with the clothes and try on some stuff. I mean, that was how we went shopping as kids, just go down to the storage room. But yeah, it's amazing to me that how she pulled that off, and then how none of her kids ended up being messed up. Like they all ended up being kind of okay, like.
It's hard, right? 8 kids, it's almost an impossibility. And I don't think you really realize that until you have your own kids and you just think, wow, this is impossible. There's no way I can really connect with each child. There's just not enough time in the day.
Mom was really patient, and I think she mostly just let us come to her if we needed something.
We were kind of left to our own devices, We were kind of like free-range kids. Walk out the front door and be gone for 6 hours at a time, and my mom had no idea where we were, and I guess she just figured it'd all work out.
She seemed a little bit gun-shy about prying too much into your life, which is kind of odd for a parent. She didn't ask a lot of interview kinds of questions. And Dad didn't either. They were both that way. They were more about giving direction, and then if you weren't doing what you're supposed to be doing, then ask, trying to find out why you weren't doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Looking back on it, I have the perspective that she did not have a lot of her own time, and I think that wore on her a lot. And I think that she had a lot of pressure to keep everything going, and I wish that she would have had more support.
Always a loving approach, I think, to everything she did. She was never an angry mom. I think she would get frustrated, but it always felt like frustration rather than anger.
Mom wouldn't let us say fart. We could only say foof. And she wouldn't let us say different things like that.
She would sit down next to me on the couch while we're watching TV and stuff, and she liked to rub knuckles. Like, she believed in reflexology at that point, I think. And so she would sit there and she would rub my knuckles. And then sometimes she would sit there and she would push my cuticles back. And just kind of, I don't know, for me that was when we made that kind of connection and kind of her nurturing. But with 7 other kids demanding her attention, there wasn't a whole lot of that. So, but that's how she would do it with me. I don't know what she did with everybody else, but she was always very vocal about that she loved us, and and she would hug often. My whole childhood, even into adulthood, she was always very, very loving and touchy, and liked to hug, as opposed to my dad, who was the opposite. Like, you just kind of knew Dad loved you, but you never heard it. You never got a hug. You never got a attaboy. It was, it was like my dad was raised on a farm, so he was treated pretty much by his dad like a farmhand.
She would always call me her beautiful Essie. And she would just compliment me now and then about, different things, which she didn't do a whole lot of that, but I felt like she did it enough. When a parent compliments you, you kind of hold on to that. And that's like the little gem. If they don't say it very often, you're like, oh, I remember that one time she complimented me. She didn't have a lot of time to spend with each of us individually, but I felt kind of spoiled because I had really bad teeth. And so we went to the dentist all the time together, she and I. And we would always stop at the donut shop on the way home, the Lehigh Bakery.
When I was in junior high was when I realized that we didn't have any money because I saw all the other girls they were all wearing the same thing. So I knew that so I started learning about fashion because they were all in on this fashion and I wasn't. And at one point my mom, bell bottoms were in, and my mom made me some bell bottoms, and I felt so loved and I felt so cool because I could dress kind of like the other girls, even though they were homemade. They didn't have a star on the pocket like the other girls, but I thought they were so cool and I felt really loved and really seen by my mom.
I remember the first time that that my mother said I love you was actually in a card that she wrote for a young women's presentation. Mom and Dad weren't very vocal about saying that they loved us, and I think it's more of a generational thing, but I remember that vividly. That was, a moment for me. And I remember when I came home from the doctor and told her that I had borderline diabetes, and I cried, and I thought that all I could eat the rest of my life was vegetables, and Mom consoled me. She was sweet that way.
Yeah, she loved physical affection. So she loved to just grab you and hug you and feel that affection, give you that affection. That was a nice balance because my dad wasn't that way, because I think he just wasn't raised that way and wasn't quite sure how to go about that.
One of the things that my mother instilled in me from a young age, and I don't think she even realized she was doing it, is that she realized who was good in her life and who in her life was pulling her down. And so I watched her as she befriended everyone, but realized those who were dragging her down, and felt more self-worth than to let other people drag her down with them.
Most of her wisdom had to do with people's behavior, and when people would mistreat you, she wouldn't brush it off, but she would let you know that some people are just going to be that way, and you have to help them and have to understand that that's the way they are, to not be judgmental of them.
When I was a young adult, I was more inclined to seek my mom's opinion on the young men I was dating. And I would ask her opinion, but she would never give me a straight up answer. And at the time I was really frustrated by it because I wanted her to give me the answer. But she always kept very neutral, and I didn't understand it because I thought that wasn't helpful. But as I became an adult, and especially a mother of adult children, I realized that there's that's the best strategy, because if ever you were to say something negative about someone your child was dating and they end up marrying that person, then you've built a wedge in that relationship. So my mom was really wise to stay out of that.
I would just listen to her or see her sitting at the kitchen table with the corded phone, because you couldn't walk around the house with the corded phone or put it on speaker phone. So she would sit there for hours and listen to her cranky friends complain for hours. She just had tons of patience for these women. And I just learned so much patience from her.
That translated into my adulthood. Like I observed that behavior as a parent. I mean, they had plenty of reasons to scream and yell. And I think that that's probably one of her biggest gifts she gave me, because I'm that way too.
I learned a lot of patience from my mother, and She was thoughtful and caring. She wanted to make sure that we were happy. She had a saying that she would always say, life is hard for the old, the young, and the in-between.
Which is not advice. It's just like, yeah, you're screwed, you know? Like, that's what life is. My mom is just very realistic.
She's real, like behind closed doors, she's very real. And that's what I love about her. Like, she's just very authentic with her children, I think.
The lesson I think that I learned from her through not even observation, just soaked it in by being around her, is that she didn't speak ill of anyone ever. And that didn't really dawn on me until I was older. I noticed that, like, oh, she never says shit about anyone. She won't do it. I would say she always tried to see the best in people, and if she didn't see the best in people, then she wouldn't communicate that to them or anyone else. Yeah.
Her default position, I mean, she's had kids for 18 years. She was having children for 18 years. And so she was in her bed a lot. You know, I mean, she was tired. She's nursing and changing two kids' diapers all the time.
I just remember her taking naps every day. I think that was her only self-care, was that she would take a nap every day. And I remember her saying, I'm just trying to sleep. You know, she was taking a nap.
Let's talk about naps. Naps aren't always because you're tired. Naps sometimes have to do with a lack of interest, right? And so I can imagine after having 8 kids and not really having anything else going on in your life, that maybe you would want to just take a break from that. You know, it's intense. That's a lot going on around the house. So you might want to just chill. Now, there's also theories around the naps that I've heard that sometimes maybe there were shenanigans going on in the evening, in the late hours in the bedroom, which led to tired moments during the day for Joanne. That's a little speculative, but I think there is some data that could say that sometimes that's why there were naps. There's data that says that from Joanne's mouth that having sex like just once a day, that's a low number. So she made it sound as though a typical number per day was more than one. Her words, and I believe Dawn is the one who gathered that data. So we'd have to check.
So at one point, and I don't know if any of the other kids would have this information because I was bold enough to ask, but I was like, don't you and Dad ever like, cause I didn't feel like they ever spent time together. Like, of course I didn't know what went on behind closed doors, but I asked her, I'm like, do you guys ever like, are you ever like intimate, you know? And she's like, yes. She's like, he gets more than any other man in Orem. That's how quiet they were about their feelings about each other or about their relationship. It's never expressed in public. It's all behind closed doors, apparently. The bad and the good.
They didn't believe in fighting in front of us, which is a good and a bad thing because I never learned how to argue. I had to go to school for that. So
they never surfaced it in front of us. There was never big confrontations. So if there was some sort of frustration or disappointment, it would surface itself just slightly in tone or a few words, but then it would be kept tight-lipped until later. And then when it was talked about later, say in the bedroom, we never heard it. There was never like outbursts or anything like that.
My parents' relationship growing up was probably tense most of the time because my mom was always tired taking care of all the kids, and especially when we were all young and the teenage boys were stressing her out, I'm sure. And then my dad was always gone. And so there was a lot of tension there that could be felt. But they didn't ever yell and scream at each other. It was just, she would just suck it up and just bottle it up and didn't really talk about it. So we didn't ever hear fighting or anything. We just learned that the best way to deal with a marriage is to just bottle it up and don't talk about it.
Laughing at sexual innuendo and stuff like that really showed up when she watched MASH, because she would watch MASH religiously every day. And Dad typically got home right when MASH was finishing up. And he didn't like that she liked MASH. He thought that the sexual innuendos and all that stuff was totally inappropriate. If it was on when he came home, he'd be like, turn that off.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I think she liked the characters of Hogan and of Hawkeye. And I think she liked, the quick-witted quips of their characters.
My mom loved watching shows like MASH and Hogan's Heroes, I think because it gave her kind of an outlet, like an adult outlet to laugh at. There were, looking back on it, there were some pretty adult-themed subjects, and I think she could just get away and laugh, even though my dad didn't really like those shows at all.
I think that was just her comic relief time, and MASH had some pretty nasty little jokes in it, at least for the 80s.
So MASH and Hogan Heroes are great shows. I think if she could, she would have watched a ton more TV. She would only watch TV when Roland was at work, because TV was not very productive.
He didn't understand the need for rest or relaxation or entertainment. So if he saw my mom watching a TV show, he would just shake his head and say, "A waste of time."
And that was Roland's number one word that I remember him saying is productive. That's not productive. Be productive. He was very reproductive. So I get it. I get why the word is important to him.
My father did not approve of watching TV on Sundays unless it was Lawrence Welk or nature programs. And my mother loved watching basketball and football. So this was really tough for her. And so when he would go visiting teaching, sometimes the TV might go on to watch a game.
And a lot of times Mom would just be in the kitchen just listening to it, because she couldn't even see the TV. So the TV would be on and she'd be listening to it while she's making dinner. And she'd be laughing over there, just listening to it. Mom and Dad both come from British backgrounds. British people are known for bad, bland food. That was certainly true in our house. Like, there were not spices. One night I was in a hotel on work and flipping through the TV, and there was a MASH marathon. And I started watching MASH, and it was like a sensory flood of all the meals that my mom had made. And I could taste the spaghetti that she made with canned tomatoes, with really almost nothing else. Like, no basil, no Parmesan, very little salt, maybe a little pepper. Horrible, like horrible. Like, if I would not eat that today. It all kind of came back to me, and I'm like, sure, it was horrible, but I loved it at the time.
She liked dark chocolate.
So when I was a child, there was often fudge that would be made while we were at school and then hidden. A pan full of fudge, and it was usually in the garage or hidden somewhere in the kitchen. And if you're lucky, you could find it. I could always find it.
I would always sneak it. I knew it was her stash, and I would hate to ask, so I would just steal it.
She would get a 9x9 pan and make fudge and just take a little square out. And so I would just kind of like shave on the edge, like, so you couldn't tell that I had.
We always knew that she had stashes Maybe the strangest places. It'd be in the dryer. I mean, the dryer and the washing machine were in the kitchen, so everything was right there. But you could go through all the cupboards and go through the washer and the dryer and fridge and look in the oven and all the places. You never find them sometimes, but then she'd just pop out with it. And
She usually hid in the garage, sometimes in the dryer.
So we could always find it in the garment drawer. She would hide things, yeah.
I remember one time I found in an odd place a stash of some chocolates, some wrapped chocolates. I think like in the closet or something like that. And I was excited, and then I just threw the entire thing in my mouth, and I think the chocolate was like 12 years old or something like that, so it tasted like ass.
If we found any in the house, it was gone, like gone. So, but the only place I ever found it was in her underwear drawer, and maybe in her bedside drawer, but that was kind of too obvious. So she had 8 kids, so how's she gonna know who took the candy?
In a laundry hamper, or in the dryer, or in the garage, anywhere she could find a hiding place from everyone. That was her treat.
Yeah, and I always knew where money was too. Like there was always money and I stole some money sometimes.
My mother was hilarious. She was very quick-witted. One day, as an adult, I was at her home, and she has these big picture windows, and a big bird flew into one of these windows and just plopped right to the ground. And kind of under her breath, my mom said, "Dun, dun, dun. Another one bites the dust." Oh gosh.
I would say that her sense of humor came out more around her siblings, and then around certain women. So like if you got Joanne and Karen Bro around each other, then there'd be some good laughs because Karen's funny, and so that's when you'd have like the full-on Joanne laughing hard, like really hard, and then kind of like even like tears, kind of she would tear up too when she laughed, which is a common swallow trait.
And I remember her being friends with a woman named Ani that was a woman that just talked and talked and talked and talked and didn't listen, and my mom would listen and listen and listen and listen. And so it was kind of a one-way friendship, but my mom was really patient with her.
I feel like she had kind of a lonely life because when I lived with her after I moved back from Nebraska, she didn't have a lot of friends, and I feel like she put everything into her kids, and she didn't have time for friends. I mean, she had friends, but like, I don't know, not like most people do, you know? But she was just devoted to family, and that was it for her.
Joanne's joy was definitely her children, and her pride was definitely her children. It kind of illustrates to me now, though, the dangers if that's your only source of pride and joy, because when that went away, when the children moved out, when there was less access to them, so when that goes away, then what was she left with? Because she didn't have any passions of her own. She was like even just like knitting.
So as far as how my mom handled her adult children, she pretty much just let us do what we wanted to do. She never had a contrary word about like, you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. She never said any of that to me, like not even once.
Like in my case, I married someone they probably never thought I would marry, as far as someone foreign and someone Black, and getting married having a baby out of wedlock. When I told her I was pregnant, it was kind of a given that we would just get married because we'd already been dating for 3.5 years. But they didn't make it a big deal. They just were supportive and matter of fact about it. She supported me in helping me raise my son, watch him, and be able to work and provide for myself.
I was thinking about like one of the most incredible moments I had with my mom, and it was when I made the decision to resign my membership from the LDS church. And I just started crying to her, and I was like, Mom, I resigned from the LDS church, and I'm sure you know why, because I disagree with their stance on LGBT and, you know, among a lot of other things, but that was just it for me. And her response was, well, it's okay. You can always get baptized after you die. Which, you know, was just a joke, you know. But that was the way she dealt with a lot of difficult things in life, is that she would joke about it. She realized that everybody's life is their own journey. She was never preachy, never guilt trippy. Like, the worst she would do is like pull down my shirt if my tattoo was showing, you know. She just...
Like what some parents do is they project, or they think they know what is best for a child, or what a child should be doing, or how they should be living their life. And I don't ever feel like she did that. I think she wanted me to meet some minimum requirements, like of doing your homework and you know, doing your chores or cleaning your room, just kind of some minimal things. But there wasn't a real big expectation beyond that. So she kind of just let me just be me in that way.
I think we're all very confident that no matter what we did in life, that Mom wouldn't love us any less.
I actually have learned a lot from the way she reacted to a lot of stressors in her life. I used to think, why is she worrying so much? It's not helping for her to be worrying. It's just stressing her out. So it kind of helped me to decide not to worry so much. Not that I don't worry, but I learned from her excessive worry not to worry so much, because worrying doesn't solve anything. So it's a good lesson that she taught me. She did a good job of teaching her children how to be good people, and her children are good people.
My son Joe was born in July of 1997, and they had come to our home in Arkansas, and my dad built a playhouse for the kids and a tall swing in the trees, and climbed up in the attic and hung some ceiling fans for me. And it was just, you know, he shimmied up the tree to hang the swing really high. That's how healthy he was at 60 years old. That's how strong he was. So it was such a shock to us when he got sick.
So I had been back from my mission for about 6 months. So I was living at home, and Don was as well. He had gotten a cold, and so he just wasn't feeling well. And he said something about that, like he's just kind of feeling under the weather. So we were all sitting at dinner, and he was sitting on the wall side. We had just finished dinner. I got up to put my plate away, and then I heard my mom scream, Roland, and he was leaning back against his chair, and his head was back. So like he had passed out. So I ran over there and just kind of tried to, shake him to come to. And about a couple minutes later, he kind of came to, and he was just kind of out of it.
Brayton and I were living in the basement apartment at Mom and Dad's, and it was a Sunday, and they were sitting at dinner with Don and Bronze, and Dad passed out. He'd been really sick, and he passed out at the table, and they called an ambulance, and I was oblivious that anything had happened until they already had him at the hospital. It was just really out of character for Dad to get that sick and to pass out, so it was really a shock.
He had a bad flu, and he went to the hospital, and then he went back home, and then my mom noticed that his speech was slurred, so she took him into the hospital again, and they misdiagnosed him with having a stroke. And so they didn't give him the proper medical treatment. had they correctly diagnosed him with herpes encephalitis, a virus that usually gives you a cold sore, but that virus got into his brain and started destroying his memory.
So encephalitis is caused by the herpes virus, which is in it's something like 60% of the population has it, or maybe it's larger. I feel like it's a larger number, but it manifests itself in 50 to 60% of the population. So it can lay dormant, it can never surface itself in, say, like the form of a cold sore. It could just be in your system. In some like unknown way, that virus can get inside of your central nervous system. And if it does, then it can grow and multiply, and it can attack your brain. So it usually attacks the brain stem, and then from there it could go further, and then you could just die. It's also really rare for it to not kill you. It's also really rare for you to get it as an adult. It's more common in children to get it. When he first went to the hospital, he was acting a little bit odd, but he remembered everything, and he could talk, and everything was fine, and he just wasn't feeling well. And then he had another attack, or he had another like stroke-like thing happened. But then that second attack is what put him more into that stroke-like symptom.
They could have given him an antiviral medication, from my understanding, and that could have healed him. But since he was misdiagnosed with a stroke, his brain was permanently damaged, and he went from a healthy, very healthy 60-year-old to not having a memory overnight, and it was devastating for our family.
If you correctly diagnose it, I think it's something like, it's a narrow window. It's like a 24 or 48-hour window in which that medication, that antiviral medication, can actually help. So it's also like really hard to time that correctly.
It was really shocking because I think he got sick in, say, November or something like that, and then I came for Christmas, and he was just different and didn't know who I was, and so it was really fast. And we had kind of a strained relationship back then, so that was extra hard too for me.
He was fading really fast as far as his memory. I think Mom, for a long time, until they really figured out what was going on, I think Mom had hope that he would get better.
So yeah, we brought him home, and then once he was kind of coming back to normal energy levels and brain function, as far as just like physical ability to move around and function, it was a very stressful environment, because he didn't know where he was, and he wanted to go places, but we couldn't let him go anywhere, and so he would get very frustrated and angry. And so within a matter of days, we realized, like, there's no way that we can manage this, because lots of times it's just my mom at home, and like, what is she gonna do? How is she gonna manage that? Lock the doors, and it was an impossible situation. So we knew we had to get him into some sort of secure area. We also didn't know that it was permanent, right? So we kind of thought, like, let's get him into a facility, let's get him getting taken care of.
I think she was hopeful, but then I think over time, I think she realized that he probably wasn't going to get better. And then it became really difficult for her at that point, because she knew that that's the way he was going to be until he died.
And it was heartbreaking for all of us, including my mom. He didn't know my name, but he always knew my mom. He always knew who she was when she would visit him.
He talked to Don and I and told us that we should, not be there all the time, that we should go on with our lives, do what we needed to do. So that gave me a lot of comfort, even though in later days, his brain wouldn't be as active. it was really hard. It was really hard on Mom, and I think she was probably just not knowing what things, there were so many fears about handling everything all on her own.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I don't know how she did it. I mean, I've prepared my kids. If I ever get like that, just drop me off on the side of the road. I just don't want them to go through that. It's hard.
Joanne had always been, I would say, dependent on Roland for a lot of things. And so now what? What are the things that Roland took care of that she now has to take care of? So there was that added burden of the home and the finances, and then figuring out disability. How much money is that going to be coming in? His retirement was close, but not quite finished. But how do we engage that retirement to pay for things? What's going to pay for his care? So that's a lot of stressful things that were on her plate, as well as the sadness of losing her husband. So the first months of him being there were, it was just really sad. It was that realization that I would never really get my dad back again. I would never be able to ask for his help or ask for advice or just get that freely. So there was that realization that felt really sad to me, like I had been robbed of something. And then visiting him wasn't too bad. He still had his personality. As long as he was like in a good mood, then it could be kind of fun and interesting just because his personality was there. But that sort of joy went away pretty quickly for me, and it just became visiting a person who had the personality traits of my dad, but there was no communication going back and forth.
I found a journal of hers the other day that she wrote every day that she would visit him. She wrote, or more like a day planner, she wrote Roland. So she visited him almost every day. And I think she felt the need to do this because she really wanted to be a faithful wife and eternal companion to her husband.
I was always really impressed with how much my mom visited Roland, 5 to 6 days a week for years.
Dad was in the care facility for almost 15 years, I believe. At first, she would see him every day. And then as the years went by, it got less and less because it was just really hard and there wasn't progress to see, and he didn't remember if we came or not.
I don't blame her at all because it was rough for me to go see him. I mean, I'd go see him every time I went home to Utah, but it was not my favorite thing to do because, here's the shell of my dad and he doesn't know who I am and.
I would say when Roland passed, I think it was a general feeling of relief. I think the sadness happened a long time ago, and especially that relief came for Joanne. And she had said to me a couple of times that she hoped that he would die because it's just hard. I mean, it's just, he had no quality of life.
I was living with Lanny when I heard the news, and I remember just feeling really grateful that it was over and feeling relieved that it was over because I was just glad that my dad wasn't suffering anymore, because towards the end even from the beginning, you didn't want to remind him who you were because then he'd feel bad that he forgot who you were. And then for my mom, her, wondering if she was going to get a phone call from the care facility that he had left, because had left like 4 times. And then they had to find him. So
she had no connection really to him anymore. And so that stress and that sadness of visiting him wasn't, that wasn't creating anything for her, wasn't creating any kind of joy or pleasure for her. So it was, it was very welcome, I think, especially for her.
When he passed, it was bittersweet, but it was nice to know that he was where he wanted to be and he was going to be able to do more good. And she was happy about that. And it's never easy, and it was hard to watch him pass.
I think Mom had always wanted him to be released from his body and ready and be able to go and move on.
So when my father finally passed away, it was kind of an end of a chapter for her. And she had already done so much crying that at the funeral, she said that she wanted me next to her because she didn't want anyone next to her that would be crying, because she didn't want to cry, because she knew I'd make her laugh. Like, she wasn't depressed and she didn't want people to like, I'm so sorry.
Mom in her later years she was just would say she just loved men with big hands and tall men. She just admired that so much. And that always makes us laugh. And she, when I moved in with her to care for her, I would be entering her room to put away laundry or something, and she would yell and say, "Hide!" to the pretend man that might be in her bedroom. And she would always joke things like that. Like she would say, "Oh yeah, my boyfriend just comes in around through the back gate and I let him in the sliding doors so you just don't see him."
So when my father fell ill, my mother, I think, was just very lost. He and her kids had been her whole world. So it took her a long time to really understand that now it was her time. It was her time to be who she wanted to be and not be so dependent on helping other people throughout their lives.
Caring for my mother was a good thing for both of us. I value the time that I was able to spend with her and the things that I learned along the way doing that, and the extra bonding that we were able to have.
But with my mom, I think I thought it was easier, but once she moved to the care facility, I didn't want to go see her. And so when she went to the hospital about a month ago, I finally went to see her, and because I was like, this might be it, because she was, had her belly distended and they couldn't figure out what it was. And then I visited her again that week in the care facility, and it's hit me a lot harder than I thought it would. Because I think I got closer to her when I lived with her, and it's just hard to see her being helpless, She begged me not to go when I was at the care facility, and I've never heard her be like that, because she's always been so strong. I think that's the hardest thing about dementia is making yourself available, but you're also making yourself available to hurt. It's just a tough disease. So in a way, I've thought it's great because I can slowly say goodbye to her, but seeing her the way she is really hard. I think my mom is most proud of her children. She loves her children, and she just always speaks highly of all of them. She's always really supportive and a cheerleader for her kids. I think that's what she's most proud of.
We even talked about today when I was there, She was talking about me to my sons and how I was a good kid and how I never caused her any problems and how I liked school, and that's probably why they like school. She said all my kids are great and all my kids have done really well. And I really think that that's her legacy, and that's what she's most proud of. And that's really what she did with most of her life, was take care of her kids.
I think she's remembered as the glue that kept the family together. Her legacy is that she's a great mom.
Every time she would call her children, she'd write down what they were doing in their lives, or for instance, when I would call, she wanted to know what the store was that I was working at and what exactly I was doing. And I would see that with my other siblings too, that she wanted to know exact details of what's going on in their lives.
I love my mother. I'm so thankful for all that she taught me, for the patience that she had with me and all of us.
I've met people that knew her a long time ago, and then they ask me, well, how's she doing? And they'll say things like, your mom just accepted me, or your mom helped me with this, or, she just has a reputation of being non-judgmental and friendly and helping people.
Sometimes it was really a struggle for her to help others because she had so much on her plate. She would still do it, and they loved any and all people. Somebody moved in on our street that was from another country, they treated them just the same, with loving, open arms, and that was a huge influence.
I think of Joanne as being this pure person with an immense potential for joy. And I think she was able to tap into that at various points of her life, and we were able to see that. And I think we're now benefited from that by seeing those moments where she had fun, where she enjoyed herself, when she joked around, when she was chill and funny. That's how I benefited from having her as a mom. I think she wanted to have fun. She wanted to laugh, and she looked for those opportunities to do that.
I want my mom to be remembered as someone who, she never wanted the limelight. She never wanted, a lot of attention. She just quietly and patiently did what she knew she needed to do, what her husband asked of her, what she felt like God asked of her, did her best to do what she knew was right.
My mother's relationship really grew over the years, and more so as an adult. And became more of a friendship than it ever had been. And I will miss being snarky with her. I will miss being quick-witted with her. And I just miss her smile.
I love my mom. I honor her for all that she sacrificed for all of us. And I especially respect how she was able to raise 8 kids on a school teacher's salary. I just think it's a miracle. I just admire all of her thrift and hard work and sacrifice that she did to be able to help us thrive. My mom is a very loving person. Even now when I go visit her in the care center, her face just lights up when she sees me. And so I most admire her ability to love people where they are. I always knew that she loved me. She had a lot of love to give to people, and I think people will remember that the most.
Hi, Grandma.
I love you so much, Grandma. You're the best grandma I could ever ask for, and I love you so much.
I love you, Grandma.
Hi, Grandma.
I love you, Grandma Swallow.
I love you.
You're the best grandma. I love you, Grandma.
Hi, Grandma Swallow.
Love you, Grandma.
Hey, Grandma, we love you.
Love you, Grandma.
You're awesome, Grandma.
I love you, Grandma.
Love you, ton, Grandma.
Hi, Grandma Jo. Love you. Thank you for being in my life.
We love you, Grandma.